everyone, and thank you for taking your time out of your schedules today to join us for our webinar on designing delightful experiences, why experience design needs strategy. My name is Ellie Jones. I'll be facilitating today's webinar, and just wait about another minute just to allow people to join. And while we do so, I just wanted to advise everybody that this webinar is being recorded. If you need to leave early for any reason, we will be sharing the recording after for you to watch at your leisure. We'll also be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so hopefully you can stay around. And please do submit any questions that you might have. You can do this by going to the questions panel on the right-hand side of your webinar screen, which looks like the image on the slide in front of you. And I'll be tracking these and making sure that any questions get answered. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Jen Hennings. She's our Senior Experience Specialist at Omobono based in Cambridge. So I'll hand over to Jen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. And again, thank you everyone for taking time out to come and join us for this today. Just a very short background about myself. I've been working in experience design for pushing on 9 years now, and it all started with designing forms in an engineering office, and 8 years later I find myself working in an experience design for Omobono, and I've been here for a couple of years now. So now that the awkward introduction part is out of the way, in the last couple of years, we've seen the B2B industry catch the customer experience bug in a really big way. And nearly every project brief that we receive now does have some form of mention of CX or UX. And recently, looking through our What Works Where yearly research, one of the questions we asked participants was what their standard metrics and measurement was for customer experience. And unsurprisingly, one of those measures was customer satisfaction, or specifically their CSAT scores. And that got me thinking, and I was just sat there and it came to mind the word satisfaction. And if you actually Google what satisfaction means, the definition comes up as a fulfillment of one's wishes, expectations, or needs. That almost sounds dull, doesn't it? I hope you'll agree that a great customer experience goes that much further than just fulfilling customers' expectations. So before we get stuck in, let's have a look at what I'm going to talk to you about for the next 40 minutes or so. First, we're going to touch on the why. Why do we need to design delightful experiences? What are the benefits to your business for doing so? And then we'll take a look at how we at Omobono define delight and some core elements of delight, and also some examples of that, so things in the industry that are working really well. Designing for delight and heightened CX has actually caused us to change the way that we approach projects, and we're going to take a look at a practical example of a type of project that has seen a revolution in our approach in recent years. We'll also take a look at how heightened CX requirements have completely changed the way that we as a generation consume music, something hopefully we can all relate to. And closing up, I promise there will be a point at the end, and I've got some key takeaways for you. So things to get you started or further along the road to creating delightful experiences for your customers. So as I've mentioned, what I want to talk about today goes so much further than beyond fulfilling expectations. And if we take a look at this quote from the Brand Keys report, delight is now the critical brand differentiator and most important driver of engagement. In 2018, our goals and marketers is changing. Retention rates are now just as important as individual conversion rates. Loyalty is driven by experience, and repeat business and long-term customer relationships is where we see most revenue coming from in 2018. And in my opinion, that's all about providing a delightful experience. As my career has progressed, I've experienced many different ways of user experience and experience design being practiced. And I can safely say that user experience on its own cannot achieve the levels of customer experience delight that we're after. But I also don't think you can do it without UX. I just think it's more of a team effort now. UX uses research and best practice to produce a solution that accurately represents the desires and needs of the target audience. And as a UX designer, their role is to be the user evangelist, to be the voice of requirement from the user. But if you only fulfill expectation or requirement, what do you get? You just get satisfaction and a lowered effort score. Now, I would say that Henry Ford had something to say about just aiming for satisfactory, but as has well been proven at this point, he didn't say this at all. But the quote is still very poignant. When the car was first invented, the target audience were asking for a faster horse. What was heard was actually they just wanted to get from A to B quicker. Now, this might all seem a bit weird coming from from the mouth of someone who built her career off user experience design and being that voice of the user. But my mind's been changed since I've worked at Omobono for the last couple of years. When I first started here, I didn't even really understand why experience design was managed by strategy. But over that time and during my time working here, I can confidently say that without strategic thinking, we'd all still be riding around on horses. So why is that important? Why is it that this needs discussing and is something that we need to focus on in businesses? And simply put, designing a delightful CX will increase your revenue. It's just that simple. And the numbers don't lie either. If you ask American Express, 1 in 2 people in the UK will pay on average a 7% premium for an improved customer experience. And in B2B, your customers are 500% more likely to continue being an ongoing customer if they receive a delightful experience. So just take a moment to think about that. That's 500% more likely to pay a 7% premium just because your customer experience is better than the competition. That seems like a worthy goal to me. I promise I won't spend too long on this slide because A, it's a personal example, B, it makes me hungry. I work out a lot, and if you ask my project managers, they'll tell you I work out too much. But part of that is because I love food. And I'm sure that's something we can all relate to. And part of that journey has been I've learned to cook over the last few years. And again, that has been pushed forward by discovery of my local farm shop. And this is where I want to talk about customer experience. And sure, I could go to the supermarket down the road and pay potentially 50% less than what I'm paying for at the farm shop. But there's something about buying from people that you like, produce of a very high quality, that you can know exactly where it's from, what's in it, and just you get that little bit more of feeling better about yourself about it. And I'm sure that there's examples that we can all think of where we pay more for something than we have to just because we want to. And that's what great customer experience does. So why is it then when clearly CX is so important and delightful CX is so important that only 2% of surveyed experiences exceed our expectations? That's a staggering statistic. That's only 2 in every 100 actually exceed what we expect. But delight is difficult to define. And how do you design for something that is so intangible? Well, we've tried to make it slightly less intangible, and we've come up with what we see as a fairly succinct definition of a delightful digital experience. And we actually break it down into 5 core elements of what makes something go above and beyond. We see these as personal, educational, inspiring, surprising, and genuine, and combine 1, 2, or all of these, and you get an experience that is exceptional and does exceed expectations. Personal experiences. As consumers, we like to buy from people that we like. It's a trust breeder, and creating personal relationships is just as important in digital as it is person to person. Educational experiences. Leave your customers coming away from your experience with your brand feeling empowered to make not only their business decisions, but also achieve their personal goals. Inspire them with stories and content that breeds conversation. Surprise them. Now, surprise is a little bit tricky because if you surprise in the wrong way, it can be quite polarizing. But if you give them a wow moment that they weren't expecting, that's really going to stick in their mind and breed further conversation. And finally, be genuine. No one wants to be talked to like a robot or in a tone of voice that totally doesn't match with the audience. So maintain your brand's personality and also in a manner that relates directly to the people that you are trying to communicate to. This is obviously a lot to aim for. And if you're just starting your journey, maybe just aim for one or two of these elements at a time, rather than going for all of them at once. And I can give you some examples of this. Now, when Coca-Cola launched their Share a Coke campaign in 2014 in the USA, they actually saw their first growth in revenue in 4 years because they targeted the millennial population. And they've now grown to the point that they have over 800 first names in circulations on their bottles, which covers 77% of the millennial population, creating a slight and slightly intangible but personal relationship with a vast majority of millennial. Casper Mattress. This might be one that's a little bit new for some people, but their USP as a business is that they sell one type of mattress of one firmness, and that's it. Now, that might seem a little counterintuitive because everyone finds different things comfortable, but there's also some real intelligence behind this, and that's what they explain in their content, is that as humans, we get very stressed out by making decisions. If you're given a vast array of options for something, it's actually a lot more difficult to make a decision than when you're just given a couple. And if you've been following KLM and their Twitter recently, you may have encountered this amazing story that one of my colleagues shared with me the other day, which was that on a long-haul flight, a customer reached their transit airport and realized that they'd left their book on a previous flight. They tweeted KLM's customer service about this, and because they were linked their Twitter and their rewards account with KLM were able to tell exactly who this person was, what their next flight would be, and when and which flight they would be on specifically. When he arrived on his next flight, he found a new copy of his book waiting for him in his seat. And that's the kind of inspirational content and story that really breeds loyalty and is something that will get talked about as just as like we're talking about it now. And if your customers talk to each other like that, you're going to see those longer term relationships. Now, Birchbox might be someone that only 50% of our audience is familiar with, and it's a subscription service for luxury cosmetics. And a new box arrives every month, offering a different range of products. And periodically, these boxes will contain a surprise, something that you weren't expecting and of something of high value. And that kind of surprise is never poorly received because we all love getting something for free. Now, I'm not suggesting that we instantly all start going and including freebies within our conversions, but it is something to think about. What can you give away that adds value to your customers, but also builds their relationship with you for longer and more prosperous business-to-business relationships? And finally, a company that I imagine only maybe a couple of people here have heard of, and that's a company called America Organic. And they are a wooden jewelry manufacturer who started in 2004. And they originally started in the closet of the founder's house, selling his jewelry on eBay. And that has since then moved into multiple and increasing sizes of premises, but they've never lost that small business touch that made them special to begin with. And I remember when I first found this website in 2012, I think I spent a solid hour on it. And if anyone who studies kind of length of workflows in digital, that's a really long time to spend on one website. And part of that is because it's so engaging and welcoming, but also because their customer service is just top notch. And what they also do very well is they have very sensory content. And what do I mean by that? I mean is that their video content and their imagery evokes senses other than visual and auditory. So you see wood and you can almost feel it. You see sawdust and you can smell it. You see machinery and you can hear it. And as humans, we respond very powerfully to sensory stimuli. So I feel like I've talked a lot at this point, so I'm going to take a moment to get some of you lot involved as well. So a very, very quick poll of, have you had a customer experience that meets all of these elements of delight? So has it been all 5 of these things? So just take a second and submit. Nearly there. So just at 85%, so. Okay, fantastic. So what I'm seeing is current statistics are saying that we have around 75% of you saying no and 25% of you saying yes. So we are slightly above that 2% that we spoke about earlier, but the majority is no. So hopefully we can take something away from today that means that we can work towards seeing more of those delightful customer experiences moving forward. So we have set ourselves quite a lofty goal here, and I realize that a lot of what I've talked about up until this point has been fairly theoretical. So I'm going to talk process for a few minutes and how we have a need to change our ways to account for all of this. And it started with a mentality shift and something that was far too prevalent in my previous experiences of UX design. And also I was, up until a few years ago, guilty of using this phrase. Not worrying about content as a UX designer, as an experienced designer, and just relying on the client to write copy is a cop-out. And you lose so much value from this kind of attitude. If we look at traditional UX approach, potentially something you could apply to a web design, it might look something like this. You start with audience research, go through personas, create scenarios, the IA, wireframes, user testing, creative design. This hopefully is something that looks relatively familiar to people. And as we've already discussed, this kind of process will of course produce a solution that the user will find entirely satisfactory, and no doubt create something that's intuitive and reduce effort scores. However, I do worry that with this kind of approach, we do run the risk of riding around in horse-drawn carts again. Considering content this late in the game is something that leads to a loss of context. The end client may well be perfectly capable of producing high-level tailored content, but context and audience research always loses a little translation from researcher to client. So that, to me and to us as a business, mandates that those doing the direct audience research should be all involved directly in content strategy discussions. A UX designer can make layout easy to follow, navigation simple to use, interactions obvious, but without a meaningful story to follow, users are still likely to disengage from a workflow. Pique their interest, write content in a manner that appeals to them, conversions will go up accordingly. Putting it simply, and this is the key message behind this entire webinar, is that experience design needs strategy to succeed. So how do we do that? If we take a look at the Umobono standard website approach now, It might look something a little bit like this. And we focus on maximizing delight throughout the UX and the CX in the touch points that we create. First off, we're not thinking about a single touch point when we do any digital project. We know that a website never acts alone. Content strategy and tone of voice are considered early and throughout, being directly impacted by audience research, where we have both experience design and strategy involved. Wireframes and interaction designs are planned down to the last detail from a content point of view before any sketching even happens. And when those wireframes have been produced, we can create page briefs for copywriters directly reverse engineered from a wireframe, so copy creation gets started as quickly as possible. Now, it might look a little bit longer than that previous process. However, it actually allows us to act at the highest efficiency and for the best possible outcome. Having content of a page decided for me before I even put pen to page on a wireframe means that I know exactly what I'm working with. I can focus on making sure that interactions and navigation are as effective as possible. Designing component libraries and having that kind of modular design allows us to keep creative design costs down, which usually would take up quite a large proportion of digital projects. And all of this means that we can focus our efforts and budget specifically on what matters the most, the audience and business insight that informs strategy. So time for another example again, and hopefully something that we can relate to is music. And if you can, cast your minds back to 1999. I can't actually believe that it was 1999 when this happened, but Napster arrived and basically dropped a bombshell on the music industry, which had up until that point been pretty firmly reliant on its physical record sales. And all of a sudden, users had access to a complete online music library they could get for free. Now, of course, Napster was totally illegal, and it had record labels up in arms, caused a large volume of lawsuits. It didn't survive, but it did change the way that we think about music for good. So why didn't it last? Why are we not still sharing our collective music library in this manner? Well, it was rubbish, for one thing. And there's plenty of quotes you can find out there about the UX of Napster, but it was, as this quote so eloquently puts it, a colossal pain in the ass, aside from the fact that it was illegal. You shouldn't need a degree in computer science to be able to use an application. That doesn't breed loyalty. And whilst free is cheap, cheap is not an effective strategy for long-term user retention. If we think about the opposite end of that pricing scale, the 21st century saw the arrival of the revolution, if you'd like to call it that was iTunes and the iPod. Now, Apple products are by no means cheap. And if we look at the psychology of that, that is actually a key part of their appeal. Humans are fueled by a need to achieve prestige. And that prestige comes in part from a perceived importance of high value material possessions. But what really helped Apple reintroduce the world to paying for music was they doubled down on experience design. They presented high quality, beautiful physical and digital products that made managing and purchasing music easier than it had ever been before. Now, that initial burst of innovation from Apple may have faded a bit, and any Android users in the audience may well agree with me, but as a dedicated Apple fan, I can also say that this is true. But Apple were one of the main nails in the coffin for why sharing services such as Napster did die off, because they elevated their customer experience. Quick poll again, and this one is very relevant to the next slide that I'm going to talk about. But if you use a music streaming service, do you pay for your membership? Just the last couple of seconds. Fantastic, thank you. And what I'm seeing there is that following the trend, that over 50% of you are saying yes. Spotify was born 9 years after the arrival of Napster. In 2008, the company changed the game again for the way we experience music. And the end of last year, Spotify announced that they had surpassed 150 million members. And whilst that statistic on its own is impressive enough, what's more important for the point of today's talk is that over 70 million of those users, so over 50%, so matching what we saw in that previous poll, was that over half of that membership is paying for its premium service. But why? Spotify and nearly all of its streaming rivals do offer a free-to-play membership option. Sure, that does involve listening to the occasional ad, but as we've said before, free is cheap. Why do that many people, and 57% of our audience today, choose to pay for their membership instead? It comes back to delight. And hopefully you can see from some of these that we're coming back to those core elements of delight we talked about earlier. You receive a personal experience through recommendations and playlists. You have a higher quality experience through constantly improving the download and the streaming quality of the music. Technology is baked into the devices you already own through Spotify Connect, and it's educating us constantly. I've discovered so much new music just from the Discover Weekly playlist that I can't tell who I'm listening to anymore. I know so much. And because of this focus on the core elements of delight, Spotify is so entrenched in the way that we consume music now that they're not going to be going anywhere soon. And I think I could probably do an entire webinar on their success and why experience design is so core to that. But I'm not sure Ellie would thank me for talking about Spotify for an hour. So you'd think that was it. That would be the game over for physical music sales. Well, actually, you'd be wrong. In the same decade that has seen the mass growth of Spotify, you've also seen a mass revival in vinyl. And that might seem really weird because vinyl is expensive. It's a much bigger financial commitment than a digital download or a $10 or £10 monthly Spotify subscription. But compared to 2006, 2017 saw 10 million recorded vinyl sales. And 40% of those vinyl buyers use streaming services to try before you buy. And we can now start to see a correlation between the rise of Spotify and the rise of vinyl, because you can now choose to select which vinyls you wish to purchase because you can listen to them before you go and buy them, before you dedicate the experience of buying vinyl, because it is a very experiential thing. It's the smell of vinyl, it's the feel of it, it's the experience of going into a record store and feeling that little bit more hipster about yourself. But it is delightful. So we can definitely see a correlation between the two. I did promise a point, and just to make up for talking about music for the last 5 minutes, I am going to make 3 instead. So what are the key things to take away from this, and actions that I think are really important to take away from today? First off, insight is king. Whether that's the latest industry trend, well-known CX campaigns, auditing the competition, or just good old-fashioned audience research, investing in that intelligence will really empower your team and their ongoing CX programs. We might have 5 core elements of delight, but that's not to say that you need to focus on all 5 at once. And we would almost suggest a divide and conquer approach here. So maybe if you're just starting to progress on this journey towards delightful experiences, just focus on 1 or 2 at a time, with different teams working on each, but collaborating together. And finally, this might seem a little obvious, but measurement is so crucial to your success. The recent What Works Where research conducted showed that even those companies who recognize that CX is fully embedded in their organizations only measure it annually. We would suggest a monthly, if not more frequent, measurement of your CX through whatever metrics that you're using, just so you can adapt your programs and make sure that the long-term success is guaranteed. Because all of this is coming back to chasing down that potential 500% increase in likelihood of repeat business for your B2B customers. So as I come to the end of what I've got to talk about before we get to questions, I'm going to leave you with this quote from Alex Blime, which I personally think is really beautiful and something, just a nice thinking point to talk away with. People are curious and playful. And in the last 10 years, we've been so focused on new tech that we haven't paid attention to the full person. So after a decade where we as a generation have sought for digital innovation, we're now desperately seeking to reclaim the physical and sensory experiences we've spent those years removing. Humans are funny creatures, really, aren't we? We've spent all that time trying to digitize everything. We don't want digital anymore. We want physical back. Thank you. I hope that some of that has been valuable to you and that it's been an enjoyable session. And we do now have time for some questions. And it looks like that we do already have some lined up. And if there are any others, please feel free to do so. And add those into the questions panel within GoToWebinar. So first question that I have in front of me is, how easy is it to scale CX programs with business growth? We're looking to push into new markets and demographics and want to know how we should approach CX. Well, scaling is obviously something that is crucial to CX success, because one of the things that I first learned when I started getting into CX was that you can't have a successful CX program externally if your CX isn't embedded internally. And there has to be a great employee experience for there to be a great customer experience. So trying to scale a CX program without scaling the team behind it is going to reduce your employee experience as stress levels go up. And I also think it's really important not just grow team size, but also to grow your insight efforts. So as you progress into new markets, I think it's really important to make sure that you are continually keeping track of who is it that you're talking to now, and making sure that your CX programs are targeted directly to your new audiences as well. So hopefully that kind of covers what you were asking for. So forgive me. And next question we have is, so if you're starting to think about a new CX program, what's the best way to start and who should be involved? So again, I think what I talked about previously here is the importance of embedding CX internally before it is moved externally as a program. And from our point of view, we very much consider CX is only successful when it is bred through an organization top down. So the key people to have involved from the very beginning of new CX programs is the board, essentially. So we work with CMOs, we work with the CEOs of companies to work on their customer experience programs, because they are the leaders of their businesses. And moving forward, they are going to be the ones that set business strategy. And a key tool that we use to do that actually is, we call it customer experience mapping. This might be something that people in the audience are already familiar with. But a great thing to do at the start of a new CX program is to benchmark your existing, to map all of the touch points that your customers go through and their journey from lead all the way through to a long-term relationship with you. So we do have another question, and what are some of the examples from the B2b space for successful and delightful experience design? Let me have a think about that for a moment. I think we can come back to I'm not sure that there's something that I could probably pull out specifically right this second, but there's certainly something we can share afterwards. So again, we're looking to progress towards delightful experience, and it's something that we're still very much on a journey on ourselves. So whilst I might be dodging the question a little bit here, what I'm hoping is that we're all going on this journey towards delight, because it is a very important journey that we're all going for. And a final question that we have here is that one of the biggest barriers of customer experience. So what is it that's kind of gets in the way of this the most? And I think if we come back to the What Works Where research again, it is looking at the ownership of customer experience. And that was one of the responses that we had most frequently, was that there was a lack of clarity of ownership over which teams within an organization are essential to own customer experience and its success moving forward, whether that be sales, whether that be marketing, whether that be internal communications, or whether that be the board. It needs to be known throughout the business who it is actually owning and responsible for that. So unless we have any further questions, or you can't think of any specifically right now, I would like to say again, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today. And I hope that you've at least learned something of interest, and that you have some ideas that you can take away and start working on creating those delightful customer experiences that we're all working towards. And hopefully when we come back to doing this again, give us an example that we can actually give in B2B Space. But if you do have any further questions or things that you'd like to get our opinion on, please feel free to get in touch with me or Ellie through any one of these channels, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you.
Okay, thank you very much everyone for joining us today. Our recording of this webinar will be shared with you once it's been processed. So any questions, let us know. Thanks, guys.